So I am Nedra Rhone, the lifestyle columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I'm going to introduce our panelists today for a conversation about Gullah Geechee culture in Georgia. First, we have Helen Latson, who is a historic preservationist and founding president of Heritage Works. Welcome, Helen. And we have Kwesi DeGraft Hansen, who is interdisciplinary studies educator and landscape architect. He specializes in hidden landscapes and uncovering some of those secrets. We also have a third panelist who is Maurice Bailey. He is not with us at the present moment because he is actually out giving a tour. So maybe when he comes on, we'll get a nice, firsthand view of the coast. I don't know, we'll see. But thank you all for being here. Welcome today. I just wanted to get started, first of all, with, one of the reasons we wanted to do this panel was because I did a column that was just taking a look at some of the issues with the what we know to be the last intact Gullah Geechee community in Georgia, Hog Hummock. And I say it hog hummock or hog hammock, one or the other, depending on who you are, right? And we got a lot of response from that. So I wanted to talk, one of the responses really was people not necessarily understanding what Gullah Geechee culture is. They were like, I didn't know about this. I didn't know that this was in Georgia. What does it mean? So I want to start there and just ask each of you, I think there's a very academic understanding of what Gullah Geechee culture is. And we know that to be, in the 1700s, we had enslaved people coming to the coast, populating this area from North Carolina down to Florida. And, because of the isolation of the coast, being able to really hold on to certain parts of the culture that they had, brought from their homeland. But I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you feel are some of the defining aspects of Gullah Geechee culture, beyond that sort of academic definition? And Helen, I'll start with you.
Wow. I think that one of the main defining aspects of the Gullah Geechee culture is resistance and resilience. These are the descendants of enslaved and freed people who were here, indigenous to the land, and also brought from West Africa and other places and in other areas in Africa. And they were not all submissive and subservient. They were also fighters who stood their ground and maintained their culture despite of people wanting to beat their language and their customs and their traditions out of them. So I think that one of the main defining things about the Gullah Geechee culture or the Gullah Geechee people is their resilience and their resistance.
Yes. Okay. Am I audible or?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Helen, and I agree with that. I'll just add a few other things. Again, thank you for having us on this program. For me, I would say language is very distinct. So when I think about the Gullah Geechee people, the language is so unique. I remember working with a gentleman who was originally from South Carolina, but Georgetown, South Carolina. And he used to actually joke. My very first experience to the Gullah was he would joke about visiting his grandmother and how she spoke funny as far as he was concerned. He said when he was leaving his grandmother, she would say, "You gwine? You gwine?" Meaning, "Are you going?" And he thought it was so funny. It was so funny, but it is so unique that some people can hear it and not know what language this is. It is English, but it's sort of customized English. And one of the things that I appreciate about it is the fact that, and I think we all should, is the fact that language is a specific means of communication, and it includes the speakers and excludes the people who don't speak it. So it's in a very simple way, it's a strategic asset or a tool. I also think about the traditions of the Gullah Geechee, like the ring shout. Many of you are familiar with it. If you're not, please Google it. It's sort of a religious communal dance that is done in the Low Country area, and it's got antecedents all the way back to West Africa, of course. And you can talk also about things like the crafts, anywhere from Charleston all the way down south. You find basket weavers who are doing things that are very, very reminiscent of what was done in West Africa. So for me, it's language, culture, traditions, all woven together.
Okay. Well, I will share with you all the first time, and I thought about this when we were chatting before. The first time I heard the word Geechee, and it was when my mother took me to see a soldier's play, and I was probably about 12 at the time. And there was that defining moment in the play when Sarge is saying to CJ, the day of the Geechee is gone, right? And I didn't know what Geechee was, where it was, what it meant. But in that moment, I felt it was something bad. And that was something that I probably carried with me into adulthood until I started to understand a little bit more about the things that you just mentioned. And so, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the representations or the depictions that we've seen of the culture in popular culture. And, I know later some of the younger members of our team of Unapologetically ATL, they referred to Gullah Islands. So they had kind of a different experience growing up. Can you share just a little bit about what do you think about the depiction of Gullah Geechee culture in popular culture, and how has that changed or evolved over the years? Or has it?
So, in my opinion, we're having another rebirth of what the Gullah Geechee culture is. Meaning when people like Alan Lomax and others wanted to start coming back to these coastal areas where people were left after the Civil War. They wanted to speak of the Gullah Geechee people or the Geechee Gullah people as backwood and root working people. And there are articles that have been written about the Gullah Geechee people, keeping them from migrating north, because they said that they were people who worked roots, and they were these spiritual people who could make things happen. And so a mysticism and a mythology came with the Gullah Geechee people. And it was so much to the point that people did not want to be associated with being Gullah Geechee, especially in Georgia on the coast, because they didn't want to be known as backwooded or individuals who were unintelligent. And so they worked really hard to hide how they spoke, as Dr. Cleese mentioned. The language, the way we articulate is very different. And so people wanted to hide that, and they did not want to be associated or affiliated with the Gullah Geechee culture. And so when we get to a time in the 90s where it's Gullah Island, it was only for us on the coast and on the coast of Georgia. We were still disconnected because we thought that it was only a South Carolina thing. And so when about 20 years ago, under the leadership of our elders, under the leadership of our Queen Marquetta Goodwin, also known as Queen Quet, it was a reckoning to let people know we are not backwooded. We are the closest that you are going to get to Africa in America. We have culture, we have tradition, and that sense of pride has now burst into something beautiful. Now everybody want to be Gullah Geechee. Everybody talk about, I'm a Gullah Geechee too, But this is not a fad. This is not a passing fad. We've been here. We've been on the coast. This is just another rebirthing of of the culture, and it has evolved to people wanting to come back home and tap into that root of where they come from. And so I think it's beautiful that it has evolved to what it is now. But for a long time, it was just a bunch of folklore and mythology that came with the Gullah Geechee culture. And so I feel like we have evolved, and now it's this beautiful flower blossoming. But we've always been that beautiful flower. But now people are starting to recognize. But I do want it to be known that this isn't a fad. We are and we will be.
That is great. Well spoken. And you know what? I can only add just a little to it. I see Maurice is coming aboard too. Hopefully he should share because you all are residents. But I also share Helen's viewpoint that there's a renaissance coming up. I mean, I see people in Savannah that I know, again, proudly saying we're Gullah Geechee. You know, I think more Geechee in Savannah, but it's the same thing. And as I said, to me, I see it as empowerment. You know, when you have something that others don't have, there can be the tendency for it to be ridiculed because they don't understand it, because actually they're a little bit jealous of it, if you will. And so they'll try and put it down, as you're saying, talking about it being backwards and so on. When actually Gullah Geechee people are the forefront. They are the forefront of African Americans. You know, they were the ones who came and led the way and populated every place else. So we all owe it to the Gullah Geechee people, especially that they've held on to this rich culture. Because when you've got culture, you've got everything. And when you lose culture, we're floundering.
Well, we're certainly going to talk about losing culture a little bit later. But Maurice, can you hear us? Did you want to add anything about the sort of how the, I guess, the reputation or depiction of Gullah Geechee culture has evolved over the years? That's what we were talking about when you popped in. Oh. Okay, maybe not. I don't know. We can't hear you. So Crazy, I wanted to go back to something.
Now.
There you are.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on Sample and running on this bus educating people on the Geechee people right now. So I'm in and out of service. But yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that I heard. We've been taught if we spoke Geechee, we wasn't accepted. I experienced myself, so did my people. So we forget about the way that we speak or to be accepted for society. They love our culture, they love our food, they didn't love us. So we're still fighting to be recognized. I know on Sapelo Island, we're a little further behind, and we got to fight harder than people in Savannah and Carolina. Just a few weeks ago, talking to the state representatives and commissioners, they want to prove how are we descendants of Sapelo. They want us to prove how are we, because it's not written in Georgia on that level that say that we are this group of people. So still fighting us. So we prove ourselves again to our county, to our state, who we are. Carolina is a little more further advanced than we are, so it's a little easier. But it's not easy.
Yeah.
Being saltwater Geechee, we are Geechee. It's not easy because Georgia, this part of Georgia is not ready for that. They don't want to admit to their round. They don't admit that we hear. They don't admit that we have a voice. So they do everything to suppress the voice of people, hoping that we disappear.
Got it.
And along with that, our history disappear.
Maurice, we're getting about every third word that you're saying, but I think I got a sense of what you're saying. I'm going to just, debrief for everyone who may not have heard that. What I think I heard you saying was basically that there has been this evolution where, people had this negative sort of impression of Gullah Geechee people, but that now they're even their demands where you are being asked to show who you are and prove that you are Gullah Geechee, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because you were going in that direction, but we'll come back to that. I wanted to go back to one thing that Kwesi was saying about culture and how the culture has spread and how really this is the genesis of African-American culture, because I think that people do make distinctions between what it means to be Gullah Geechee and what it means to be Black American. But can we talk about some of the ways in which these cultures are so intertwined? Yeah, go ahead, Kwesi. I'll ask you to say that.
Okay. I'll say that African American culture or Black culture is a derivative of Gullah Geechee culture.
True.
What do I mean by derivative? Of course, I mean, as I alluded to earlier, the people who we call African Americans, Black Americans, African Americans, populated the entire United States, mostly entered the United States from the Gullah Geechee coast. You've got Charleston, which we know imported about 40%, in fact, more than 40% of all those who were brought to the Americas, all the Africans came through Charleston. Then South Carolina, then Savannah, New Orleans. So you've got a huge population. I've read somewhere that says about 75% of all African Americans come through the Gullah Geechee areas. And so when I say that it's a derivative, everything that has become African American culture, whether it's the music, jazz music, you can take jazz music all the way back to the music that enslaved people sang and chanted while they were in production in the fields, right? The call and response. You know, while they were working, the leader will say something, then the rest repeat after him. You find that call and response in churches. You find that call and response in music. Then you can talk about the food. And so anyway, I'll leave it at that and let Helen and Maurice also add to it. But I think, again, that everything that is African-American really comes out of Gullah Geechee culture.
Yeah, so Helen, when we talked before, I think you started talking about hand games, and we were talking about some of those, and I was like, I had no idea that this thing that I had learned, these chants, you know, that they were tied to Gullah Geechee culture. But tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Right. So just to piggyback off of what Kwesi has already said, you know, Gullah Geechee is in everything and everywhere. You know, when we talked about the ring shout, there was a dance called the buzzard lope, which is directly tap dance is a derivative of the buzzard lope. Our jazz music, everything that we love, everything that we do. Some people call it succotash, you know. We call it gumbo, or we call it okra, corn, and tomato. Whatever. When the Great Migration happened and people were leaving the South to go up north, they did not leave the South behind. They took their traditions, they took their cultures with them, as they did when they came across the waters. And so, you know, even from the structures that we have, the Brooklyn Bridge has pine wood from Gascoigne Bluff here on St. Simon's Island. And so we are in everything and everywhere, from our music, our culture, our hand games. Beth Lomax Halls made a documentary that was showing the hand games that were done in California and New York. And she wanted to know, how did the songs that reminded her of the South when she was doing research there, how did it spread? Well, like I said, people didn't leave their traditions and cultures, or, you know, their traditions and their cultures in the South. They brought it with them. And these were pieces, these were fragments of them. And so Gullah Geechee is a part of the quilt of America. Because if that majority of people started off in South Carolina, Brunswick is one of the first 5 ports on the coast of Georgia. Okay, so if it all started right here on this coast and it spread out, we're a part of everything. So American culture can be accredited to the Gullah Geechee culture. Our
Mhm.
music, our food, how we communicate with one another, how we interact with one another. Um, a lot of people like to say, well, there's differences between the North and the South, but if they're in the North, they were in the South first. And so that when we migrate, we don't leave the things, we don't leave ourselves behind. We bring everything within us to make this beautiful quilt that we call America. And so we're here.
Yeah.
And I mean, we out here and we're not going anywhere. And as much as they would love to extract Gullah Geechee, or as much as they would like to take African American culture out of America, they can't. It cannot be done.
Yeah.
We're woven into it because we helped to build it.
Right.
And so, and not only helped to build it, we built it.
Right.
And that's who we are, and that's who we be.
I was very surprised when I was researching the story that I wrote to learn that there have been efforts over 2 centuries to dispossess descendants of their land. I mean, 2 centuries. It was 1802, and this was, either individuals or entities or what at some point. And I thought, that is, who knew? I had no idea that was the case. First of all, but how do you feel that this fight has evolved over time to hold on to land? Because as I think Kwesi said earlier, land really is part of the culture. You can't split these things apart. It is part of it, and you need to have this land in order to retain the culture. So how has that sort of fight to stay and preserve, how has that evolved over time?
Oh, people have gotten a little bit smarter. It used to be, we'll come to your place. Well, first, when I do take people out and to explore the coast, people always ask, well, why would they give their land up? And I always ask them, if you grow up in a situation where people tell you you're no good, your land is no good, you're not going to be anything if you stay in your small little town, you need to go off and go somewhere else so you can be somebody. When someone comes and offers you a piece of money and you're not rooted in yourself and not rooted in who you are, or people have told you that you're not going to be anything if you stay here, a lot of people would like to get away so they can be somebody. So it started off as that, this is bad land, you don't want to be here, you can't do anything here, you can't grow anything here. And the conditions of, let's not forget Jim Crow. Let's not forget the Ku Klux Klan. Let's not forget black codes that were forcing people out of their homes and out of their communities. And people were going to seek refuge in the North where things were supposed to be better. And so we have to take into consideration all of these things. And the Great Migration went on up until the 70s or the 80s, where people wanted to flee the South for better opportunities. And so the conditions that people have been under, who wants to fight all day, every day? It's a fight. And so these people, the Gullah Geechee people, went from tenant farmers to being tenants in these apartment complexes that were worse than what they were living in. Mm-hmm. And so, we have to really take into consideration, nobody wants to give their land up. Nobody wants to leave home. but they do want a better opportunity. And if it's not afforded to them, they take their livelihoods in their own hands.
Right.
And so now it goes from, you'll throw some money or eminent domain, because there are places like Harris Neck where that was a Black community, and the government came in and said, you can't be here anymore because we need this land. And then they moved all of those Black people out of Harris Neck and didn't use it anymore and made it into
an airstrip.
A bird,
a bird sanctuary.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a sanctuary for the birds, but the people,
but not the people.
Yes.
And so we got to take these things into consideration. People not just walking away from their land.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so even now, things like eminent domain are still happening
in
2023. Okay. And so we cannot be shocked or taken aback that these things are still happening. When I walk outside and I see this beautiful, even visiting Sapelo, for instance, you go on Sapelo, that is one of the most beautiful places that you are going to go to on the Georgia coast. The prettiest white sand. It's just so beautiful.
Hey, excuse me, Helen. Excuse me.
Yes,
I'm sorry. I got a lot to say about everything you're saying, but Sapelo's a totally different beast from a lot that's been discussed. But I have to take some people to the ferry, so I'll be disconnected for another 7 minutes.
Oh no! All right, we'll be here if you make it back.
I'll make it back. So just give me a little while, get to the ferry, drop people off, and then I'll be back on.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Crazy, I wanted to jump over to you because we need to get to Q&A too. I can't believe we are running out of time, but I definitely wanted you to speak about what I think have been sort of the legislative efforts to
dispossess.
To dispossess, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Maurice, too. As you were aware, and some of the audience may not be, but very recently, I believe that in Sapelo, there was not in Sapelo, but concerning Sapelo, there was a House Bill 273 that sought to, in a way, dispossess descendant residents of Sapelo Island. There is a board. I believe there's 5 people on it: the governor, the chairperson of DNR, and so on. But essentially, there's a minority of descendants, people who live on Sapelo, on that board. And some wording was proposed which would have made them in a very small minority, which meant that people who consider themselves, who are outsiders, but who purchase property on the island, part-time residents, can be on that board, and they could vote to dispossess the people who've lived there. Anyway, it was defeated. And I want to say, I know Maurice is off air right now, but I hear that he drove all the way from Sapelo Island overnight, got to the legislator right here in Atlanta, just in time. He was given 2 minutes to present. And anyway, the wording was changed to protect the descendant community. That said, I'm very familiar with another bill that happened 2 years ago, HB 906, which was written to allow a developer or any developer to purchase up to 15 acres of these types of properties. Butler Island Plantation, which is not far from Sapelo, also in McIntosh County, it's 1,500 acres of former rice plantation. And Butler Island, we need to take a minute and talk about, very, very significant like Sapelo, because it was one of the largest plantations owned by a signer of the U.S. Constitution, Major Pierce Butler. And his grandson also caused the largest slave sale in recorded American history, known as the Weeping Time. So you've got these very significant places. There are cemeteries on Butler Island, but somebody came up proposed to the city of Darien, McIntosh County, and went all the way up into the Georgia legislature that they would acquire 15 acres of that for a brewery or a distillery. It almost went through again. In fact, it passed the House and was in the Senate when, concerned citizens, concerned descendants, concerned activists stopped it. But so, Nedra, it shows and it goes to show the pressures that these precious places are facing. Sapelo Island, this House Bill 273, it was in the House and the descendant residents had no idea, which means surreptitiously, these bills get proposed. And if they're not caught, they pass, they become law. And Hilton Head Island is an example. It used to be totally African American. Now you've got a handful of families at best that live there. St. Simon's Island's the same. So you've got these pressures. Dofusky Island's the same. The entire Gullah Geechee corridor, with, as Helen said, some of the most pristine and beautiful landscapes. Why are they that beautiful? Well, part is nature, is also partly because of the enslaved Africans who worked there, tended these landscapes, who are buried there. And then all of a sudden you've got this, whether it's eminent domain, as Helen said, or development pressure, so many things trying to push them out. So anyway, I'm grateful for all of you who are battling to preserve these places. Grateful to Nedra and the HAC and any other vehicles that help this get the publicity it needs, because it's very important. These lands are sacred lands that have to be held in our hands.
So we are getting close to the end of this, which is so unfortunate. We need to make this like 2 hours next time.
Yes.
But I wanted to make sure that we got some of the questions that people are asking. So I'm going to look here. And so there are a couple of people who wanted to know, how large is the Gullah Geechee community in Georgia? Do we have any estimate of how large it might be?
So the Gullah Geechee the Heritage Corridor goes from Jacksonville. It began as Jacksonville, North Carolina, to Jacksonville, Florida, at 35 miles inland. Mm-hmm. And so on the coast, starting from Savannah to Camden County, and all of the Barrier Islands and 35 miles inward. That is the coast, the corridor for Georgia. So from Savannah, Georgia, there are Barrier Islands that are there, all the way down to Camden County, their Barrier Islands, 35 miles inward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. All right, and we have another one saying, this is asking about agriculture. How do you see the legacy of African agricultural practice manifested in Georgia Gullah Geechee lifestyle? Is this retaining its value with Gullah Geechee youth?
Interesting question. Please repeat that again. Agriculture. Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. What is the legacy of African agriculture? How is it manifested in Georgia's Gullah Geechee community? Do you think the legacy will continue with Gullah Geechee youth? Okay,
I'll try and take that on. So of course, in the Gullah Geechee areas, the agricultural crop, plantation crop, I should say, historically, was rice on the islands that were flooded, like Butler Island. And then cotton in the higher grounds. It started with indigo, but mostly it was rice and cotton. What I do know is that in terms of legacy, there are some areas that still grow most of these just for exhibition. I do know that there was a sugarcane, and Maurice Bailey, I believe that his mother started a sugarcane farm on Sapelo. They do grow other crops. I know that some areas also grow, I think, rice just for exhibition purposes. I think what we need to do, all of us, need to ensure that little groups, little pockets of these crops are maintained. If for educational purposes alone, I think it's very valuable.
Okay. All right. The other question that a lot of people ask about is, how are Gullah and Geechee the same or different? Are those different terms?
Helen?
We're one. For a long time, Gullah was used to be for the people of North Carolina and South Carolina. Geechee was for the people in Georgia and Florida. But we are all a part of the corridor. There are some, there are some things that may be different from between North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, but we are one, and so we don't disconnect ourselves from one another. We are all with one purpose, and that is to preserve and protect the culture.
Okay. There's another question asking, any suggestions on how I can learn more about Gullah Geechee farmers in Georgia and how to support them?
One of the things that I would say, and it might be even broader than just the farming, but I think that people, especially in Atlanta and outside the Gullah Geechee corridor area, need to make a concerted effort to visit, number one, visit these places. Stay there if you can. For instance, Sapelo Island, you can stay overnight. There are guest houses and so on that are suited for that. So anywhere from, as I said, North Carolina all the way down to Florida, I think that it behooves us to make an effort to visit these places, to visit them, especially when there are cultural events happening. I know there's cultural day on Sapelo Island. There are events. There's a Gullah Gullah events all over all Gullah Geechee events. There's Geechee Kunda in Liberty County. The Weeping Time, which is a slave sale, I mentioned it. Every year there are commemoration events in Savannah and Darien, St. Simon's Island. So I think that if people visited and participated in these areas, it would help strengthen what's already being there and preserve what's there. I hope it answers, even with the agricultural question. I mean, I think it's more about just being there,
Yeah.
plugging in.
No, that's good, because actually there were several people who were asking, how can we help? How can we stay connected to preservation efforts? Helen, do you have any other thoughts about how can people help? What can they do to be part of this?
Well, currently, I am the founder of the nonprofit Heritage Works, which is all about training docents, agriculturalists, and construction or trades people within the Gullah Geechee descendants. Because here on the coast, we know that Gullah Geechee is a very a word that we say a lot. But most of the time, the people who are talking about the Gullah Geechee people are not descendants, nor are they of African American descent either. And so we have this nonprofit organization where we are building up our own workforce, and being able to put our own descendants out to make their heritage work for them. I am currently speaking to you from historic Gilliard Farm that has been in the Gilliard Johnson Rayford family for over 150 years. We invite people out to come visit. We are planting rice. We have rice. We had a rice planting in early April or late March, and so we always invite people out to the farm. They are always needed on the coast. Sapelo, Geechee. There are so many places. The vineyard is so vast. And we just need helping hands that are going to help us keep what we have going on going. So I would always invite people to be a part. You can I think the link to Heritage Works is with you've already shared that link, and so Heritage Works is here, and I know that there are other places on the coast that are always looking for people to help.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nedra, if I may add, and thank you so much, Helen. I also want to add my voice to the fact that it's actually vital. I mean, we started, one of the conversations was the dispossession of this culture. And I think that if we want to ensure that this culture stays alive, and it should, it means that everybody who can should learn more about it, visit the space again. And one thing I wanted to say, I think that there should be people who purchase property. For instance, if someone is living in Atlanta and can afford a second residence, why not buy in these areas? Because as we heard, there are pressures from developers, pressures from other people. Let's say Sapelo. People are building in Sapelo, raising taxes, which is a way to force the residents out. So why should it not be either descendants who have moved away, or other African Americans, or other people who want to ensure that this doesn't happen? So active participation, visiting, building, setting up businesses, that's how we're going to ensure that this stays. And I'll just say this again, the continuity we mentioned from the Gullah Geechee coastal areas spread to the rest of America. But then we have to not forget that, of course, Gullah Geechee brings culture from West Africa all the way here. So it is vital that Gullah Geechee stays and thrives, because it is our connection. Their words, language, foods that trace straight back to certain parts of Africa. So in the search to find out where am I from as an African American, which part of the continent? Well, if we start in the Gullah Geechee area and we don't lose what we have, it points us straight to Sierra Leone, straight to Ghana, straight to wherever. So that's vital.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. It's the end of the program. I could sit here and talk to you guys for a lot longer. But I do want to thank you again for being part of this. Maurice as well. We didn't get to see his face. We didn't get to hear him much, but I know he was there listening. And I just want to invite everyone to subscribe to Unapologetically ATL. It's our free newsletter. And today's edition is themed on the Gullah Geechee culture. You'll see a wonderful essay from Tina McElroy Ansa. There are stories that I have written related to Sapelo, and there's also a story about Butler Island. So these are things that we love offering to our subscribers. And if you subscribe, you will get more of this. Maurice, I hear, is that you talking?
Oh, that's the wind talking. I had a whole lot to say and a whole lot about Sapelo that it was not addressed. But, I was in and out of service and we don't have any time left.
I'm so sad about that. We're going to have to circle back with you.
Yeah. Sapelo doesn't fall under some of these things that was spoken about. We're under a whole different attack than the other Geechee cultures.
Yes. Well, we are, like I said, unfortunately out of time, but we are going to circle back. I'll connect with you separately and we'll talk some more. So everyone stay tuned. I'm sure that you may see some more about Gullah Geechee culture here in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nedra. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Maurice.